The north is cold and full of whispers.
Wind worried at Winterfell's battlements like a hand that could not find purchase. It slid through the cracks in the stone and set the torches guttering in their iron brackets, sending thin ribbons of smoke crawling along the corridor ceilings. In the great keep, the hallways held the cold the way old bones held pain, without complaint, without release. Servants moved softer than usual. Men spoke in murmurs that died as soon as they were born, as if the castle itself might hear and take offense. In the tower chamber the air smelled of boiled linen and lavender, and something sharper beneath it. Sweet milk turned, old blood, the faint sourness of fear. Catelyn sat in the chair beside Bran's bed with her hands folded in her lap, knuckles pale. The chair was too small for a lady's waiting, too hard for a mother's, and she did not shift. She had learned the pattern of the room's sounds, the slow rasp of the fire in the hearth, the occasional tick of sap popping, the sighing of the curtains when the wind found them. The maester's chain clicked softly sometimes when he leaned over the boy, metal brushing metal in a sound too bright for such a dim place. Bran lay still. They had piled furs over him until he seemed a small mound of Winterfell's own life. Wolf pelts and brown bear, thick enough to hide the shiver of his ribs. Only his face showed, pale against the dark of the blankets. His lashes too long, his mouth parted as if he had meant to speak and forgotten how. The skin at his temple carried a fading bruise like spilled ink, and beneath his hair the stitches held shut what the fall had opened. A bowl of water sat on the table near the bed. The surface had gone flat as glass. Catelyn could see herself in it if she leaned forward. A woman with eyes too wide and cheeks gone hollow, hair braided and pinned because she could not bear loose strands tickling her neck while she waited for her son to breathe. She had counted his breaths. At first, in the first nights when the fever came and went like a cruel tide, she had counted them in whispers against her teeth, as if numbers could keep him anchored. Later she stopped counting because the rhythm was a metronome for hope, and hope had begun to hurt. Now she watched his chest for the smallest rise, the smallest fall. Every time it moved, her fingers tightened around each other until her wedding ring bit into her skin. Maester Luwin stood near the window, his back to the room. He held a raven scroll in one hand that he did not open again. He had read it already. She could see it in the way his shoulders sat, set with a heaviness that did not belong to a man who had spent his life among ink and herbs. The blackbird in its cage by the shuttered window hopped once and ruffled its feathers, unsettled by the tension in the air. Outside, somewhere in the yard below, a horse whickered. Catelyn did not look up. A footstep sounded at the threshold. Soft, careful, the step of a man who did not wish to be noticed and yet could not help being himself. The door creaked as it eased wider, then stopped. She felt Ned before she saw him, the way she could feel a hearth's warmth even with her back turned. The room changed. The air held its breath. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his shadow cast long across the stones. He had removed his gloves, and his hands were red from cold, the skin rough where sword hilt and reins had worn it. His hair was damp near his brow, as if he had been outside and the wind had breathed frost into it. He did not wear his lord's finery. He wore the plain dark wool of the north, and a fur-lined cloak clasped at his throat with a silver direwolf. Behind him someone else lingered. Ser Roderick's broad shape, half seen, half hidden, as if the hallway itself wished to keep him from intruding on this chamber. Roderick's eyes flicked to Bran and then away, respectful as a man in a sept. Ned closed the door softly behind him, and the click of the latch sounded like finality. He crossed to the bed, and Catelyn's gaze followed him without her head moving. He looked down at Bran for a long moment. His face did not change, but his mouth tightened at one corner, and his hand hovered over the boy's hair, as if he feared even a touch might break something else. At last, he brushed his fingers lightly over Bran's brow, smoothing a stray curl away from the stitches. The gesture was so careful it seemed made of apology. "He's warm," Ned murmured. Catelyn's throat made no sound when she tried to answer. The words lived inside her and would not come out. She swallowed, and the taste of ashes from the hearth filled her mouth. "He was cooler at dawn," she managed, voice scraped thin by disuse. "It's the fever taking its course." Maester Luwin turned from the window, his chain whispering. "My lord," he said softly, "I can do no more than I have done." Ned's hand dropped to his side. "I know." Silence settled again, thick as the furs on Bran's small body. Outside the chamber, Winterfell continued to prepare itself. Catelyn could hear it in the distance, the faint ring of metal, a shout cut short, the deep rumble of wagons being loaded. Men had been moving through the keep all morning like blood through veins. Horses were being shod. Banners were being folded. The household guard were sharpening steel and checking saddlebags. The castle was putting on its traveling skin. The castle was letting Ned go. Catelyn stared at Bran's face until her vision blurred, then blinked it clear. If she blinked too often, she felt as if she were abandoning him in small pieces. Ned took a breath. The king's party leaves at midday. There it was. The sentence that split the world in two. Before midday, after midday. Catelyn's fingers loosened from each other, and she reached toward Bran's hand. It lay palm up on the blanket, a child's hand with blunt nails, the fingers slack as a fallen leaf. She enclosed it in her own. His skin was warm, but it was the warmth of a fire banked too low, hidden under ash. "Then you should go," she said, and heard the lie in it. Ned's eyes shifted to her. Gray eyes, the color of wet stone. They had looked on battlefields and funerals and the long winters of the north. Now they looked at her like a man looking at a door he did not want to open. "I should," he agreed. He did not move. Catelyn stared at his cloak clasp, the direwolf's silver head catching a flicker of firelight. She remembered fastening that clasp at his throat on mornings when he rode the King's Road to inspect fields or hunt. The clasp always seemed cold at first, then warmed under her fingers. She could not imagine her hands empty. "The letter," she said. It came out sharper than she intended. "You have read it." Ned's jaw worked. "Yes." Maester Luwin held up the scroll as if it were a piece of evidence. The wax seal had been broken, the paper creased where it had been unrolled and rolled again. "Lady Lysa's words are grave," Luwin said. Grave. A polite word for poison? Catelyn squeezed Bran's hand. In her mind she saw her sister's handwriting, the slant of it, the way the ink thickened at the end of strokes. She heard Lysa's voice, once laughing in Riverrun's sun, now a raven's croak on parchment. Jon Arryn was murdered. The Lannisters did it. Trust no one. Words as sharp as a knife, delivered in the dark to a woman who had no blade left to spare. Ned looked down at Bran again, and when he spoke his voice held the weight of duty like a yoke. "If the hand was murdered, and the king is blind to it, then I cannot refuse him. Robert is not here," Catelyn cut in, and the heat in her own voice startled her. The fire snapped in the hearth, loud in the pause that followed. "He is in King's Landing, surrounded by Lannisters and flatterers, and he wants you to walk into it with your eyes open and your throat bare." Ned's gaze lifted to hers. "I will not have you speak treason in my own tower." Catelyn's grip tightened again around Bran's hand until her knuckles stung. "Then, call it what it is," she whispered. "A trap." Ned's shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. He looked suddenly older than his years, as if the North's cold had sunk into him and made a statue of the man she loved. "I have no choice." Catelyn's eyes flicked to the raven cage. The bird watched them with a black bead of an eye and gave a soft, questioning croak. Ravens were meant to carry words, not threats. "I have made a choice," she said. Ned's head tilted slightly. "Catelyn, I am coming with you." The sentence fell into the room like a stone into still water. For a moment, nothing moved. Even Maester Luwin seemed frozen, his chain caught mid-swing. Ned's eyes narrowed, as if he had misheard. "No." Catelyn did not look away. "Yes." "You cannot," he said, and there was steel in it now, the voice he used in the yard when breaking quarrels. Bran has Maester Luwin," Catelyn replied, and she did not let herself glance at Luwin as she said it because she could not bear to see his pity. "He has the nurses, he has the castle. He has you," Ned said softer. Catelyn's throat tightened until it hurt. She looked down at Bran's face. His lashes did not flutter. His mouth did not close. He did not reach for her, did not call her name in sleep like her other children had when they were small. He lay beyond her reach no matter how close she sat. "He has me," she echoed, and the words tasted bitter. Her fingers traced the edge of Bran's palm, the faint crease where a boy's hand would someday harden into a man's. "And what good am I to him, Ned? I sit. I watch. I pray. I would trade my heart for his breath, and the gods do not answer. The only thing I have done since he fell is wait." Ned's gaze flicked to Maester Luwin, then back. "The capital is no place for you." The capital is no place for you, Catelyn shot back. She rose from the chair in a smooth motion that surprised even her, as if her body had been waiting for permission. The chair scraped softly on stone. Her legs were stiff from hours spent sitting, but she ignored the ache. You are going where we have no friends. We have the king, Ned said. We have a man who drinks too much and laughs too loud, Catelyn said. And the cruelty of the truth made her flinch inside even as she spoke it. A man who has not seen you in years and thinks your honor will keep you safe in a city that feeds on honor like carrion. Ned's mouth hardened. Enough. Catelyn stepped closer to him, close enough to smell the cold on his cloak, the clean scent of snow and horse. She had known this scent since she was a girl sent north to marry a stranger. It had become home. Listen to me, she said, low. In the south you will have no one you can trust. Not the queen, not the council. Not even the men who smile and bow. You will be a wolf in a pit of lions. You think I do not know that? Ned's voice cracked. Just a hair, and for an instant, the Lord of Winterfell was only a man in a room where his son might die. Catelyn reached for his hand. He did not pull away. His fingers were cold from outside, and her own were warm from holding Bran's. The contrast made her shiver. You will have me, she said. His eyes flashed. And if they take you, then they will have to reach for me, Catelyn replied, and there was something feral in it that she did not recognize as her own until it was already spoken. Not just you, not just the girls. Me. They will have to show their teeth. Ned stared at her as if seeing her anew. She had been Lady of Winterfell for 15 years. She had managed stores through harsh winters, soothed squabbles between bannermen, watched over births and burials. She had lived inside stone walls and built a life inside them. Perhaps he had thought that was all she was. She felt the thought like a blade's edge. It steadied her. You would leave Robb, Ned said. Catelyn's hand tightened around his. Robb is almost a man grown. He has the North in his blood and in his bones. He has Ser Roderick and Maester Luwin. He has the bannermen, who would die for your name and mine. Ned's eyes went to Bran again, involuntarily. Catelyn followed his gaze. She stepped to the bedside and laid Bran's hand gently back on the blanket. The skin clung to her fingertips for a heartbeat, warm and empty. She lowered her palm to the boy's hair, just once, pressing lightly as if she could leave some part of herself there, some warmth, some blessing. You will not be alone, she whispered, and did not know if she spoke to Bran or to herself. Behind her, Maester Luwin cleared his throat. My lord, he said, careful. If I may, Lady Catelyn's presence in King's Landing could serve as a shield of a different sort. A lady hears things men do not. Doors open for her that would close to a soldier. Ned's expression shifted, reluctant consideration warring with stubborn fear. And if she is right, Luwin continued, and there is danger at court, it may be wiser she remains close to you than be separated by 1,000 miles and ravens. Ned's fingers flexed once inside Catelyn's grip. His gaze dropped to their joined hands. The direwolf clasp on his throat glinted. At last he exhaled through his nose, long and slow. Who will rule Winterfell? Catelyn turned. Robb, she said. Ned's eyes went distant, as if he could see the godswood and the yard and the great hall, his son sitting in the high seat, trying not to show how young he felt. He is 15, he is a Stark, Catelyn said, and he will not be alone. Ned's gaze shifted toward the door, where Ser Roderick waited like a wall. Roderick straightened as if summoned. I will remain, Roderick said at once, voice steady. Winterfell will have my sword, as it always has. And Theon? Ned asked. Catelyn's mouth tightened briefly at the thought of Balon Greyjoy's son, all swagger and smirks, his smile too easy. Yet Theon had grown up in these walls, had trained beside Robb, had eaten at their table. He was a leash on the Iron Islands, yes, but also a boy who had learned to call Winterfell home even as he pretended it meant nothing. Theon stays, Catelyn said. Robb will need companionship that is not duty, and Theon will want to prove himself. Ned's eyes held hers. You trust him? Catelyn did not answer the question he asked. I trust Robb to keep him close, she said instead. For a moment, Ned stood very still. Then he nodded once, sharply, as if the motion cost him something. Very well, he said. If you come, you obey me. You do not put yourself between me and danger. Catelyn's lips curved, a humorless line. That is what you have done for me since I came north. Ned's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I," he said, "and I will do it again." Winterfell's yard smelled of horse and steel. The morning had brightened, but the sun gave no warmth. Frost clung to the grass along the edges of the stone like sugar, and the air bit at exposed skin. Men moved with purpose, voices rising now and then in sharp calls. Saddles here, straps there, a complaint about a missing cloak. Carts stood half-loaded with chests. The direwolf banners hung limp in the cold, their gray shapes indistinct against the white sky. In the center of it all, Ned's household gathered. Jory Castle tightened a girth strap with practiced hands, his breath steaming. Hullen checked the horse's hooves and muttered to himself. Guards stood in a loose line with spears upright, the iron heads catching pale light. Sansa stood near the steps, wrapped in a cloak far too fine for the yard, her auburn hair braided neatly under a fur hood. She watched the preparations with eyes shining in a way that made Catelyn's stomach twist. She clutched her riding gloves as if they were treasures. Arya lingered farther back, half hidden behind a stone pillar, her hood up, her face set stubbornly as a boy's. She kept glancing at the horses like they were enemies she might need to outwit. Robb stood at the foot of the steps. He had dressed as his father would dress, dark wool and leather, a cloak clasped with bronze. Grey wind paced at his heels, a shadow with teeth, the dire wolf's breath a faint fog in the cold. Robb's hand rested on the wolf's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. He looked older than he had the day before, as if the news had stretched him. Catelyn descended the steps to him, her own cloak heavy on her shoulders. The stone beneath her boots was slick with frost at the edges. She moved carefully, but her pulse beat hard enough that she felt it in her throat. Robb's eyes met hers. They were Ned's eyes, the same gray but softer at the corners still. "They tell me I am to sit in father's seat," Robb said. His attempt at steadiness was almost perfect. Almost. Catelyn reached up and adjusted the clasp at his throat, straightening it as she had done when he was a child and could not bear crookedness. The small act anchored her. "You are to sit in it," she agreed. "You are to listen. And you are to learn." Robb's jaw clenched. "I know." She could see the words he did not say pressing behind his teeth. "Why you? Why are you leaving?" She slid her hand to his cheek, warm against the cold air. For a heartbeat she saw him not as the young lord in the yard, but as a boy racing through the godswood with a wooden sword, cheeks red, laughing. "You will have Luwin," she said, low enough that the men nearby could not hear. "And Ser Roderick. You will not make decisions alone. Promise me." Robb's eyes flicked over her shoulder, toward the steps, where Ned stood speaking quietly to Jory. "You're coming," Robb said. It was not a question. The knowledge sat heavy in his voice. Catelyn nodded once. Robb swallowed. His throat bobbed. He took a breath and said, carefully, Then, I will do as you ask." "Not as I ask," Catelyn said. "As Winterfell needs." His mouth tightened. "Winterfell needs father." Catelyn's hand remained on his cheek. The cold pricked at her fingers, but she did not pull away. "Winterfell needs a Stark," she said. "And today that is you." Robb's eyes glistened, but he did not let tears fall. He leaned into her palm for the barest instant, then stepped back, putting space between them like a man practicing separation. Behind him, Theon Greyjoy sauntered closer, hands at his belt, smile half-formed, as if this were all a game with stakes he did not believe in. Yet his eyes watched Robb carefully. Even Theon understood that something had shifted. Ned approached then, cloak fastened, sword at his hip. His gaze moved over Robb, lingering on the boy's posture, the set of his shoulders. Approval, pride, worry. Three things balanced like blades. "You will hold Winterfell," Ned said. Robb straightened, chin lifting. "I will." Ned stepped closer. He did not embrace his son, not in the yard before men. But he placed a hand on Robb's shoulder and squeezed once, hard enough that Robb's leather creaked. "Keep the peace," Ned said. "Do not draw steel unless you must, and if you must, end it quickly." Robb's eyes did not blink. "Yes, father." Ned's gaze shifted briefly to Grey Wind, the dire wolf's pale eyes fixed on him. The wolf's ears flicked, and its tail moved once, slow. "And keep your brother safe," Ned added quietly. Robb's throat worked again. "I will," he said, and something fierce flashed in him. Catelyn's eyes pulled toward the tower window, far above, where Bran lay hidden behind stone. She imagined the bed, the furs, the still face. The thought struck like a needle. Ned turned to her then, and for a moment the yard fell away. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw everything unsaid. If he dies while you are gone, if he wakes and you are not there, if the South takes you from me. Catelyn stepped close enough that her cloak brushed his. "We go together," she murmured. Ned's hand found hers, briefly, fingers curling like a promise. Then he let go. "Mount," he called, voice carrying now, Lord's voice over the yard. Men moved. Horses stamped. Leather creaked. Metal clinked. Sansa stepped forward, cheeks flushed with excitement, and allowed a guard to help her into her saddle. Arya resisted the offered hand, scrambling up herself with graceless determination. She looked down only once, and her eyes met Catelyn's, sharp, uncertain, pleading, without asking. Catelyn went to Arya's horse and adjusted the girl's cloak, tucking it closer around her. Arya's shoulders were tense as a bowstring. "Stay near me," Catelyn said. Arya's mouth twisted. "I can. Stay near me," Catelyn repeated, and this time Arya nodded, small and reluctant. Catelyn mounted last. The saddle was cold beneath her, the leather stiff. Her horse's breath steamed up around her boots. As the line began to form, Catelyn looked back at Winterfell's great doors, black against the pale stone. Smoke rose from the chimneys in thin threads. The godswood lay unseen behind walls and snow, its heart tree watching with its red eyes. Robb stood in the yard, cloak snapping lightly in the wind. He lifted a hand, and she raised hers in return. The gesture was too small for the size of what it meant. Then the gates opened. The cold air beyond the walls smelled cleaner, sharper, snow and pine in the long road. The King's Road waited, a ribbon of dirt and frost leading south into a world of green and gold and lies. Catelyn's gaze flicked once more to the tower window. She could not see Bran from here. Only stone, only shadow. She pressed her heels in gently, and her horse stepped forward. Behind her, Winterfell's walls began to fall away, one pace at a time. The King's Road had carried them out of winter as a river carries ice into warmer seas. At first the change came in small betrayals. The snow along the ditches grew thin and dirty, trampled down by wheels and hooves until it was more mud than white. The pines that had stood like black sentries along the road thinned into bare-limbed oaks. The wind lost its bite. It still blew, still worried at cloaks and sent hair loose from braids, but it no longer tasted of iron and clean stone. It smelled of damp earth and old leaves. Then, somewhere south of the neck, the world remembered green. Fields opened on either side of the road in long rolling stretches, the soil dark and rich beneath the thin crust of winter's last breath. Farmers watched from a distance with wary eyes, hands tucked in sleeves, their faces sun-browned even in the cold months. Catelyn saw carts laden with turnips and sacks of grain, wagons piled high with firewood. She saw small folk gathered in muddy yard corners, their laughter sharp and bright like sparrows. She should have welcomed it. She had been born to rivers that never froze and summers that stretched long and gold. Yet the sight of green grass felt like a lie. It made her skin prickle beneath her furs, as if the world were trying to lure her into softness. The King's party moved like a bright wound along the road, banners snapping, armor glinting, horses stamping. Men called to one another, japed, sang ribald songs at night around the fires. They ate well. Robert's wagons carried casks of wine and barrels of salt pork and flour enough to bake bread for a small town. There was laughter in plenty, but it did not reach Catelyn, not when she closed her eyes at night and saw Bran's face as he lay beneath furs, lashes still as death. Not when she woke with the taste of ash in her mouth and the memory of Robb's hand lifting in farewell like a man already burdened. Ned rode most days at the front, his presence a dark line among the bright cloaks of southern nights. He spoke little. When he did, it was to ask after the girls, or to give quiet orders to Jory. His eyes were always moving, scanning the men around the king, the lay of the land, the shadows beneath the jokes. Catelyn rode close enough to him that their horses' shoulders sometimes brushed when the road narrowed. She could feel the tension in him in the way he held his reins, steady, controlled, as if he were gripping down on something that wanted to break loose. On the last night before King's Landing, they camped near a small river where reeds whispered against the bank. The air was mild enough that their breath did not cloud. The men lit fires, and the smell of roasting meat drifted through the trees. Catelyn sat with her cloak wrapped tight and watched sparks rise into the dark. She did not eat much. The meat tasted too rich, the air too soft. Ned came to her when the camp quieted. "We will reach the city by noon," he said, lowering himself onto a log beside her. Catelyn stared at the fire until her eyes stung. "And then we are in their hands," she replied. Ned's gaze went to the line of sentries posted at the edge of camp. Even here, in the woods, he set guards as if expecting an attack. "We are in the king's hands," he corrected. But it sounded like a man repeating a prayer he did not entirely believe. Catelyn glanced at him. The firelight made lines in his face, etched shadows beneath his cheekbones. She reached beneath her cloak and found his hand, threading her fingers through his, feeling the hard calluses that had formed over years of sword and reins. His hand was warm. It steadied her in a way the fire could not. "You do not trust your friend," she said softly. Ned's thumb moved once over the side of her finger. "I trust Robert," he said, and then, after a pause that was almost imperceptible, "I do not trust what sits around him." Catelyn looked into the dark beyond the firelight, where trees stood shoulder to shoulder. Somewhere in that black, the road continued south. "I will be your eyes where yours are turned elsewhere," she said. Ned's mouth tightened. He did not answer, but he did not pull away either. They sat in silence until the fire burned low and the night deepened around them like ink. By morning the air held a new scent, smoke and salt. It grew stronger as they rode. Not the clean smoke of pine logs in Winterfell's hearths, but a greasy, layered stench, coal and tallow, burned refuse, smoke that clung to hair and cloth as if it had fingers. The road crowded. Carts creaked past, piled with cabbages and fish. Men drove pigs with sticks, their squeals rising over the rumble of wheels. Beggars appeared at crossroads with hands outstretched, their palms black with grime. Then, at last, the city rose before them. King's Landing spread across the hills like a bruise. The walls were immense, pale stone with towers that stabbed at the sky. Above them, the Red Keep loomed on Aegon's high hill, its walls the color of dried blood under the noon sun. The city below was a tangled mass of rooftops and narrow streets, a sprawl that seemed to have grown without plan, fed by greed and mead and the crush of too many bodies. And the noise. Gods, the noise. It reached them before the gates did. Shouting, laughter, the clang of hammer on metal, the thin cry of children. It was a living thing. A roar that swallowed the sound of hoofbeats and made Catelyn's skin crawl. Heat rose from the city like breath from an open mouth. It pressed against her face, damp and thick, carrying the stink of sewage and fish and sweat. It was nothing like the cold purity of the north. In Winterfell the air cut clean. Here it coated the back of her throat. Arya wrinkled her nose from her saddle, eyes narrowed at the walls. "It smells," she muttered, loud enough for Catelyn to hear. Sansa, riding stiffly, lifted her chin as if the smell could not touch her. Her cheeks were pink with excitement. "It's the capital," she said. Like that explained everything. Catelyn said nothing. She watched the guards at the gate, gold cloaks over chainmail, spears in hand, eyes flicking over the king's party with practiced indifference. She watched the faces pressed close behind them, small folk craning necks, eyes bright with hunger for spectacle. There were too many eyes. She felt them on her skin like insects. As they passed through the gates, the city swallowed them. Streets narrowed, buildings leaning inward as if to listen. Windows hung open and people watched from above, faces half hidden behind shutters. The air was thick with cooking smells, onions frying, bread baking, spices she could not name. Somewhere nearby, someone dumped a chamber pot from an upper floor, and the sour stench hit like a slap. Catelyn's horse tossed its head, unhappy. She kept her hand on her reins and her other hand near the hilt of the small knife she wore beneath her cloak. It was a ridiculous thing, a little blade against a city that could swallow whole armies, but it made her feel less naked. They climbed. Streets gave way to wider roads as they rose toward the hill, and with each step upward the buildings grew finer. Stone instead of wood, carvings around doorways, guards posted in polished armor. The stench lessened, but it did not vanish. It simply hid beneath perfumed air, like rot beneath flowers. At the Red Keep's gates, Lannister guards stood in crimson cloaks, lions stamped in gold on their breasts. Their armor shone, their faces did not. Ned dismounted first, handing his reins to a groom without looking away from the men in red. Catelyn followed, boots touching stone that was warm underfoot. Warm stone. The thought itself felt wrong. Sansa dismounted with help. Arya jumped down, nearly stumbling, and caught herself with an embarrassed scowl. Catelyn reached for her before she could dart away. "Stay close," she murmured. Arya's jaw tightened, but she did not pull free. Not yet. They were led through the gates into a courtyard paved in pale stone. Sunlight fell hard and bright. A fountain threw water into the air, and for a moment Catelyn stared at it, absurdly struck by the waste. In Winterfell, water was precious in winter, ice chipped from wells. Here they sent it dancing into the air for beauty. A line of servants appeared, as if conjured, bows and curtsies practiced, eyes lowered. The keep smelled of polished wood and lemon oil and something metallic beneath it, like coins handled too long. They ascended steps that seemed made for kings and conquest. The halls beyond were broad, their ceilings high and painted with scenes of dragons and battles, all fire and blood and triumph. Tapestries hung thick on the walls. Torches burned even in daylight, their smoke curling lazily upward. Gold gleamed everywhere. Catelyn thought of Winterfell's greystone, honest and blunt. Here the stone was carved, polished, painted. Here beauty was meant to distract, it did not. She felt the danger in the way guards watched from shadows, in the way servants went still when Ned passed, then whispered behind hands when he was gone, in the way the air itself seemed thick with secrets. They entered a hall that opened like a mouth, and there she was. Queen Cersei sat beneath a canopy of crimson and gold, her hair a river of pale light falling down her back. She rose as they approached, and her smile was smooth as a blade. "Lord Stark," she said, her voice warm and rich, as if she spoke to an old friend. "And Lady Stark, welcome to King's Landing." Catelyn inclined her head. "Your Grace?" Cersei's eyes moved over her, quick, assessing. They did not linger on her cloak, or her hair, or the travel dust on her boots. They lingered on her face, on the steadiness of her gaze. Cersei's smile held. "Such a long journey," the Queen continued. "The North must feel very far away." "It is," Catelyn answered, and allowed no softness into it. "But duty makes distances smaller." Cersei's eyes flickered. "Duty?" she echoed, as if tasting the word. "How very stark." Ned stepped forward, voice stiff with courtesy. "Your Grace." Cersei turned her attention to him, and her warmth sharpened. "The king is delighted you've accepted his offer," she said. "He has spoken of little else since we left Winterfell. You must forgive him, he's been restless." Catelyn could picture Robert's laugh, his booming voice, the way he had bellowed at his men like a boy. She could also picture the moment in the Godswood when he had stood over the dead direwolf, uncomfortable with grief that was not his own. "How is the king?" Ned asked. Cersei's smile widened. "Healthy, strong." She let her gaze drift briefly to Sansa, who stood behind Catelyn like a bright, hopeful flame. "And your daughters? They are as lovely as ever." Sansa flushed, curtsying awkwardly, nearly tripping over her own skirts. "Your Grace," she breathed, eyes shining. Catelyn felt her stomach twist again. Arya bowed late, stiffly, as if the act were something she despised. Her eyes never left the Queen's face. There was defiance in her even now, a spark that might be crushed or might burn a city down. Cersei watched Arya for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then returned her gaze to Catelyn. "And your son," Cersei said softly, the words sliding into the space between them like a knife. "The little one who fell." Catelyn's breath caught. For a moment she smelled boiled linen and lavender again, heard the hush of the tower chamber, saw Bran's still face. "We left him in good hands," she said, and her voice did not tremble. "Maester Luwin tends him." "How fortunate," Cersei replied, and the sympathy on her face was so perfect it made Catelyn want to scrape it off with her nails. A mother's heart must ache, being so far from him. Catelyn met her gaze without blinking. "A mother's heart aches in any place," she said, "but it does not change what must be done." Cersei's smile shifted a fraction. The Queen understood then. Catelyn saw it in the slight narrowing of those green eyes, the way her gaze sharpened like a hawk's. Not a wife trailing after her husband out of obedience. Not a frightened woman clinging to her lord, a mind that had made a choice, and would make others. "Indeed," Cersei murmured, "there are many things in this city that must be done." A soft laugh sounded from somewhere behind Cersei's shoulder, light as a feather. "Lady Stark!" a familiar voice said, as if greeting an old companion at a feast. Catelyn's blood went cold. Petyr Baelish stepped into view with a smile that was too easy and eyes that shone with something too bright. He wore fine clothes, dark velvet trimmed with mockingbird feathers at the collar, a dagger at his belt more ornamental than practical. His hair was brushed back neatly, and he smelled faintly of spice and perfume, like the city itself had dressed him. Petyr, Catelyn said, and kept her tones smooth. He bowed low, exaggeratedly, as if to remind the court that he knew how to play at respect. "It warms my heart to see you again," he said. "Though I confess I never expected the North to part with you." Ned's face darkened. "Baelish," he said, and there was no warmth in it. Petyr's smile did not falter. "Lord Stark, I see the years have not softened you," he replied, as if it were a compliment. Catelyn felt the old memories stir. Riverrun's halls, sunlight through wide windows, a boy with quick eyes and a mocking grin who had loved her in the way boys love what they cannot have. Brandon Stark's laughter, blood on stone. The duel fought over a woman who had been more symbol than person to the men around her. She pushed it down. That was past. She had no room for ghosts now. Cersei watched them with interest that she pretended to hide. "Master Baelish," she said, "you know our guests?" "Of course, Your Grace," Petyr answered. "Lady Catelyn and I share old friendships." Ned's jaw tightened. "You were a boy when I last saw you," he said, and Catelyn heard the warning behind it. "Do not trust him." Petyr spread his hands. "And now I'm a man," he said lightly. "King's Landing has a way of making boys grow up quickly." Catelyn's gaze held his. His charm was polished now, his laugh practiced. But beneath it she could still see the boy who had once looked at her as if she were a prize to win. "You serve on the King's Council," she said. "I do," Petyr replied with a small bow. "Master of Coin. A dull title for a dull job, but someone must keep the realm from drowning in debt. And now you will sit where Jon Arryn once sat," he said, voice softening. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." Catelyn watched him closely. There was a carefulness there, a measured grief that could be genuine or could be another mask. In this city, she suspected masks were easier to come by than truth. Ned said, "We have come to serve the king." "And to enjoy the city, I hope," Petyr said, and his gaze returned to Catelyn like a hand reaching. "There is much you have not seen, my lady, much you could learn." Catelyn felt Ned's eyes on her, heavy with distrust. She could imagine the words he would say later, in private. "He cannot be trusted. He is not your friend." And yet, Petyr was standing here, close to the queen, speaking as if he belonged. He moved through this hall as if it were his own skin. He knew where doors led. He knew which men could be bought and which could be broken. He knew the hidden currents beneath the gold. Catelyn had not come south to be blind. "I will need guidance," she said, and watched Petyr's smile deepen just a fraction. "We are strangers here." Ned's head turned sharply. "Catelyn," she did not look away from Petyr. "I would not stumble through the capital like a fool," she continued evenly. "Not when there are those who have walked these halls longer." Petyr's eyes gleamed. "You honor me," he said. "I am at your service." Cersei's gaze slid between them, measuring. "How touching," she murmured. "Old friends reunited." Catelyn offered the queen a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "We Northerners value loyalty," she said. Cersei's smile returned in kind. "So do I," she replied, and the words landed like a stone. A servant appeared then, bowing low. "Your Grace," he whispered. "The king." Cersei lifted a hand, silencing him, and turned back to Ned. "You must be weary," she said, voice suddenly honey again. "The hand's chambers have been prepared. We will speak more at supper." Ned bowed stiffly. "Your Grace." Catelyn curtsied. "Your Grace." As they turned to leave, Catelyn felt Cersei's gaze on her back like heat from a forge. She did not flinch. She kept her steps measured, her posture straight, as if she were not walking deeper into a lion's den. They followed a pair of guards through corridors that grew quieter as they climbed. The air here was cooler, touched by sea breeze slipping in through narrow windows, but the keep still held its own warmth. Catelyn could feel sweat prickling at the base of her neck, beneath her furs. The walls were lined with tapestries so thick they muffled sound, yet sounds still slipped through. Laughter from a distant hall, the faint cry of someone arguing, the clatter of metal somewhere out of sight. The keep did not sleep, it pulsed. At a junction, they passed an open doorway where gold gleamed in heaps. Plates, goblets, ornaments laid out on tables as servants polished them. One of the servants glanced up, eyes dull, then looked down quickly. His hands moved mechanically over a goblet, rubbing until it shone. The gold was bright, the man was not. Rot under the gold, Catelyn thought, and tasted the city's stink again. Petyr walked with them for part of the way, as if he belonged by their side. He chatted easily, pointing out corridors and names. The Tower of the Hand, Maegor's Holdfast, the small council chamber. He spoke of them like a man speaking of rooms in his own home. Ned said little. His silence was a wall. His eyes flicked to guards, to corners, to doorways. He watched Petyr the way a wolf watches a fox, aware that the creature's lightness was its greatest weapon. When at last they reached the Hand's chambers, a heavy door opened into rooms that were large and richly furnished, more lavish than anything in Winterfell outside the great hall. A wide bed draped in linen, a table carved with flowers, candles in silver holders, their smoke smelling faintly sweet. Catelyn stepped inside and felt no comfort. She moved to the window and pushed it open. The air that rushed in was warm and damp. Below, the city sprawled in every direction, rooftops packed tight, streets like veins. Beyond it all lay the Blackwater, a sheet of gray-blue, and beyond that, the open sea. From here, King's Landing looked almost beautiful. From here, she could not smell its filth, only the salt and smoke and distant spice. She could not see the beggars at the gates, or the waste in the gutters. She could not hear the low murmur of fear beneath the laughter, but she knew it was there. Behind her, Ned spoke quietly, the door closing with a sound like a lock. "You should not trust Baelish," he said. Catelyn kept her eyes on the city. "I do not trust him," she replied. Ned's pause was sharp. "Then why?" "'Cause we have no one else," Catelyn said, and finally turned. Her face felt warm from the air, but her blood was cold. "You will hunt for truth in a nest of liars. You will need someone who speaks their language." Ned's eyes held hers. "And you think you do?" "I think I can learn," she said. For a moment the room was silent, but for the distant hum of the city, a sound like insects in tall grass. Catelyn glanced back out at the sprawl below. Somewhere far north, in a tower chamber of gray stone, Bran lay still beneath firs. Somewhere far north, Robb sat beneath Winterfell's banners and tried to fill a seat too large for him. Here, the air was thick and warm and smelled of secrets. Catelyn rested her palm against the window frame, feeling the heat in the wood, and let it ground her. She had chosen this. Whatever happened in this city, she would not be a passive thing carried along by other people's games. She would not be a hostage in her own story. Below, a bell began to ring somewhere, slow, resonant, as if announcing something unseen. Catelyn listened until it faded into the city's roar, and then she turned back into the room, into the gold, into the rot that hid beneath it. The first night in the Hand's Tower did not end in sleep. Catelyn lay beside Ned on sheets that smelled of lemon oil and someone else's comfort. The bed was wide enough for three, draped in soft linen that slid beneath her fingers like water. In Winterfell, cloth had weight. Here, it was all smoothness and surface, as if even fabric had learned to flatter. It was not the honest heat of a hearth earned by chopped wood and stoked coals. It was a damp, clinging thing that sat on her skin and made her long for cold air to bite her awake. When she closed her eyes, she heard the hum of King's Landing below. The distant shout of laughter, the sharp ring of metal, the faint, ceaseless murmur of too many lives stacked together. It felt like lying on the edge of a sea that never stopped moving. Ned slept fitfully, one arm thrown over his eyes as if to block out the painted ceiling. He had spoken little after their arrival, but she had felt the tension in him like a drawn bow. He turned once in the night, muttering a name she could not catch, and the sound scraped her nerves raw. Catelyn lay still and listened. At some point before dawn, the bells began to ring. Not the solemn toll of Winterfell's small sept, but a bright, almost careless peal that rolled through the city and into the keep like laughter. It reminded her of the fountain in the courtyard, water thrown into the air for beauty, for spectacle, for waste. She rose while Ned still slept. The floor beneath her bare feet was warm. The air smelled of salt and smoke. She crossed the chamber to the table where her travel satchel rested. The leather creased from the road. Her fingers moved with the practiced care that came from years of keeping order in Winterfell. Folded cloth, stacked letters, keys kept in the same place. She drew out the raven scroll she had kept tucked away, the one Maester Luwin had pressed into her hand before she mounted at Winterfell's gates. The wax had been broken once already. She smoothed the parchment flat with her palm and stared at the words as if they might change in the night. Lysa's hand was still familiar, though the lines had grown tighter than she remembered, the strokes sharper, frantic at the edges. Catelyn could almost see her sister's fingers trembling as she wrote, breath quick, eyes darting to a door that might open at any moment. Jon Arryn was murdered. The sentence sat there like a stone in a river, splitting everything that came after it. Catelyn read the letter again, slower than she had the first time. She followed each word to the end, to the warning that felt less like counsel and more like a plea from a woman cornered. The Lannisters did it. Trust no one. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken as she folded the parchment back along its creases. Behind her, the bed creaked softly. Ned's voice came low and rough with sleep. "You're awake." Catelyn turned. The half-light from the window caught the planes of his face, the hard line of his brow. He sat up, hair tasseled, his eyes already clear despite the hour. He had always woken like a soldier, as if some part of him expected battle even in his own bed. She held the letter out. Ned's gaze went to it, then to her face, and the faintest tightening appeared at the corner of his mouth. He took the parchment and read in silence, his eyes moving steadily, his expression giving nothing away until he reached the end. Then his jaw set, the muscles in it flexing. "So," he said at last. The word was quiet, but it carried weight. "She believes Jon Arryn was murdered." "She does not believe," Catelyn replied. Her voice sounded too loud in the still chamber. "She knows, or she thinks she knows enough to risk sending this by Raven." Ned's fingers tightened around the parchment. "Lysa has always been afraid," Catelyn said, cutting in. She could see her sister's face too clearly. Wide eyes, quick breath, hands twisting at her skirts. And fear makes a woman do strange things. But this, she nodded at the letter. "This is not strange. This is a warning." Ned stared down at the words again, as if he could press truth out of ink. "If she is right," he murmured, "then the Hand was killed in his own city, under the king's nose. And you have taken his place," Catelyn said. Ned looked up. In the dim light, his eyes seemed darker than usual. "You should have shown me this sooner." "I showed you the moment we could speak without walls listening," she answered, and glanced toward the door as if to prove her point. Even here, even in the Hand's chambers, she could not shake the feeling of unseen ears. The keep was too full of servants and guards, too full of people who wore other men's colors beneath their own skins. Ned's mouth tightened. "We will speak of this at the council." Catelyn's stomach clenched. "Not openly." Ned's gaze snapped to her. "If Jon Arryn was murdered, then the man who did it is still here," she said, and stepped closer, lowering her voice though no one else was in the room. "And if he killed the Hand, he can kill the next. If you announce you are hunting him before you know where he stands, you will die with your honor clean and your throat cut." A flicker passed through Ned's eyes, something like anger, something like grim acceptance. He had lived too long among Northmen who spoke plain. Here, plain speech could be a blade turned in your own hand. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his tunic, close to his skin. The gesture was intimate in a strange way, as if he meant to keep the danger where he could feel it. "Very well," he said, quietly, "but we will not ignore it." "No," Catelyn agreed, and the word tasted like iron. A knock sounded at the door. 2 quick raps, then a pause. Catelyn felt her shoulders tighten. Ned called, "Enter." The door opened and a servant slipped in, eyes lowered. Behind him stood a guardsman in Stark colors, with a raven on his forearm. The bird's feathers were dusted with road grit, its beak opening and closing as it shifted restlessly. The sight hit Catelyn like a blow to the chest. From the north, her mouth went dry. The guard stepped forward and offered the scroll. "My lord," he said. "From Winterfell?" Catelyn moved before Ned could reach for it. Her fingers brushed the parchment, rough and travel-worn. The wax seal bore the direwolf. Her hands shook as she broke it, and she hated herself for it. Hated the weakness the city drew out of her. She read. The room narrowed to the black lines of ink and the pounding in her ears. Maester Luwin's hand was steady, measured, but even through his careful words she felt the urgency. An assassin came in the night. He meant to cut Bran's throat. Summer took him before he could finish, but not before blood was spilled. The direwolf saved the boy. The man carried a dagger of Valyrian steel with a dragon bone hilt. We have the blade. Catelyn's vision blurred at the edges. She read the words again, as if the second time might change them. Blood, assassin, Bran. She saw it in her mind, her son's small throat, the pale skin, the flash of steel. She saw Summer's teeth, the wildness in the dire wolf, the sudden violence in the tower chamber she had left behind. She tasted bile. Her knees went weak. She gripped the table edge until the carved wood bit into her palm. Ned's hand closed around her elbow, steadying her. Catelyn, he said, and his voice held a sharp edge now. What is it? She thrust the letter at him. Ned read quickly, his eyes narrowing, his face going stone-hard. When he reached the end, something cold settled into his expression, something that made him look like the Stark of old tales, all winter and judgment. So it begins, he said softly. Catelyn could not speak. She could only stare at the raven, at the black feathered messenger that had flown so far to bring her news of her child almost dying without her. Without her. The guilt came like a physical weight, pressing down on her lungs. She had left. She had chosen to ride south, to walk into court intrigue, and while she sat under painted ceilings, a man had crept into Bran's chamber with a blade. She heard her own earlier words, bitter and true. The only thing I have done is wait. And now she had not even waited. She had been gone. Ned folded the message with careful fingers, but there was nothing gentle in him now. Jory, he called sharply toward the door. Jory Cassell appeared almost at once as if he had been waiting outside. His face was serious. My lord? Ned held out the letter. Read. Jory's eyes moved over it. His jaw tightened. Gods, he breathed. Who would? That is what we will find out, Ned cut in. He turned to the guardsman with the raven. Was the assassin captured? The guard shook his head. The dire wolf tore his throat out, my lord. Sir Roderick said. There was no questioning him. Catelyn's fingers curled into a fist. The man was dead. Whatever truth he carried died with him, soaked into Winterfell's stones. Only the dagger remained. Dragonbone hilt, Ned murmured, more to himself than to anyone. Valyrian steel. Jory frowned. That's no common blade. No, Catelyn managed, the words scraping out of her. It's a weapon meant to leave a message. Ned's gaze lifted to hers. In his eyes, she saw the same realization. This was not a random cut purse or a drunk with a knife. This was a hand reaching from somewhere deep in the city, reaching all the way north to silence a sleeping child. To silence a witness, perhaps? Or to punish? Catelyn's throat tightened. She thought of the tower window in Winterfell, the place she had stared at as they rode away. She thought of Bran's still face beneath furs. She thought of his lashes fluttering once. Had they? As if his spirit had tried to return. Ned turned to Jory. Bring Petyr Baelish, he ordered. Quietly. And send word to the small council that I will attend at once. Jory hesitated. Baelish? Ned's eyes were hard. Now. Jory bowed and hurried out. The raven croaked softly, unsettled by the tension. Catelyn's hands had gone cold despite the warmth of the room. Ned looked at her for a long moment. You were right, he said. The words should have felt like victory. They did not. They tasted like ash. The small council chamber was cooler than the corridors, shaded from the sun, but it held its own kind of heat, the heat of men packed into a room with too many secrets. The table was long and carved dark, polished until it shone. Chairs sat around it like thrones in miniature. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting dragons in flight, their red wings spread over burning fields. The cloth muffled sound, but it could not silence it entirely. Catelyn heard the faint pulse of the keep beyond, the distant clink of armor, the murmuring footsteps of servants. They had not meant for her to come, she could tell. The guards at the door hesitated when Ned entered with her at his side, as if uncertain whether a woman belonged here. Ned's gaze fixed on them until they stepped aside. Inside, the council waited. Pycelle sat hunched like an old turtle in his heavy robes, his great beard spilling over his chest. He looked up with watery eyes and offered a smile that seemed meant to soothe. Varys was there too, soft hands folded over his round belly, his powdered face calm as milk. Renly lounged at the table's end with a careless ease that did not quite reach his eyes. Sir Barristan stood like a statue of honor, white cloak draped over his shoulders, his face unreadable, and Petyr Baelish sat as if he had always belonged, one leg crossed over the other, smile ready at the corner of his mouth. When he saw Catelyn, his smile brightened in a way that made her skin prickle. He rose with an exaggerated bow. "My lady," he said softly, "I did not expect to see you in such company so soon. The city must be eager to make your acquaintance." Catelyn did not return the warmth. "It seems eager to make itself known," she replied, and let her eyes sweep the room. Each man, each expression, each flicker of surprise or irritation. Pycelle's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, then slid away. Varys watched her with the mild interest of a man studying a new piece on a Sivas board. Ned took the hand seat with the stiffness of a man sitting in borrowed cloth. Catelyn stood behind him, hands folded in front of her, posture composed. She felt like prey choosing to look like a predator. Ned did not waste time with pleasantries. He set the folded message from Winterfell on the table. "We have received word from the north," he said. His voice cut through the room, steady and cold. Renly leaned forward slightly, interest sharpening. Pycelle's mouth tightened, as if news from the north were an inconvenience. Varys's eyes widened a fraction, not in surprise, never surprise, but in attention. Ned continued. "An assassin attempted to kill my son." Silence fell. Not shock. Catelyn had expected shock. Instead, she felt the silence the way she had felt the keep's tapestries, thick, smothering, full of hidden things. Pycelle made a soft, sympathetic sound. "How dreadful," he murmured, hand going to his chest as if his heart pained him. "The poor child." "Spare me," Ned said, and the edge in his voice sliced cleanly through Pycelle's false pity. The man carried a dagger of Valyrian steel. That shifted something. Even Renly straightened. Sir Barristan's jaw tightened, the faintest reaction. Varys's expression remained calm, but Catelyn saw the quick flick of his eyes to Petyr, then to Pycelle. Pycelle blinked, slow. "Valyrian steel," he repeated, as if the words were too heavy to lift. "Such a blade, such a treasure, that is no weapon for a common killer?" "No," Ned agreed, "which is why we must ask, who would send it?" Pycelle spread his hands, palms up, helpless. "The realm is full of enemies, my lord hand. Bandits, disgruntled men, those who envy your station." Ned leaned forward. "Jon Arryn did not die of envy," he said, and the room seemed to tighten around the name. "He died suddenly, after years of good health, and now a killer comes for my son with a dagger fit for a prince. These things are not separate." Catelyn felt the weight of Lysa's letter inside Ned's tunic, close to his skin. She could almost hear her sister's words echoing through the chamber even though they remained unspoken. Pycelle's eyes darted. "The hand was an old man," he said quickly. "He had been unwell for some time. A stomach ailment, a lingering weakness. Such things take men, my lord. It is the way of—" "Enough," Ned said again, and this time it landed like a hammer. "You served Jon Arryn. You were his maester. Tell me what you know of his last days." Pycelle's lips pursed. He looked as if he were searching for the safest answer in a pile of dangerous ones. "He grew tired," he said slowly. "He had little appetite. He spoke often of his son. He spoke often of something else," Ned said, voice tightening. "He went to see men in the city. He asked questions. He visited a book." "What book was it, Pycelle?" The old man's eyes flickered. "A book of lineages," he admitted reluctantly, as if the confession pained him. Catelyn watched Varys's face. The eunuch's expression did not change, but the corner of his mouth twitched, just a hint, as if he enjoyed watching someone squirm. Ned pressed. "Why did he read it?" Pycelle's gaze slid away. "The hand had many duties," he said. "He took interest in the realm's history, in the genealogies of noble houses." Renly laughed, light and sharp. "Jon Arryn? Interested in dusty names?" He shook his head. He was interested in what those names meant. Pycelle shot him a look, then turned back to Ned, beard shifting as his chin trembled. "My lord hand," he pleaded, "I am an old man. I have served the crown faithfully, and faithfully to whom?" Catelyn asked before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. The question hung in the air, dangerous and plain. Pycelle's face reddened. "My lady," he sputtered, "I serve the king." Catelyn held his gaze. "The king is not in this room," she said softly enough that it sounded like courtesy, sharp enough that it cut. Ned's hand lifted, a subtle warning. "Not now, not openly." Catelyn lowered her eyes, but she did not lower her thoughts. She watched the way Pycelle's hands shook, the way his eyes avoided Varys, and lingered instead on the lion tapestry behind Ned's seat. She watched the way Petyr sat with his smile half hidden, as if amused by the tension. Varys cleared his throat delicately. "If I might," he said, voice smooth as velvet. "The city is a garden of sorts. Beautiful, yes, but gardens have snakes. They hide under stones. They coil in shadows. They wait." Ned's gaze fixed on him. "Do you know who killed Jon Arryn?" Varys spread his hands, elegant and helpless. "I know many things," he said softly. "I know who whispers. I know who listens. I know who pays. But knowing is not the same as proving." Ned's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly." Varys smiled faintly. "Plain speech is a dangerous luxury in King's Landing," he murmured. "Men who speak plainly often find their tongues cut out." Catelyn felt a chill despite the warmth. Rot under the gold, she thought again, and it tasted truer here than it had in the corridors. Ned's voice went colder. "Then tell me this. Why was Jon Arryn asking questions? What did he find?" Varys's eyes flicked to Catelyn, then back to Ned. "Perhaps he found a truth," he said, "and perhaps that truth was inconvenient." Renly shifted in his chair, his smile gone now. Sir Barristan remained still as stone, but his eyes watched Ned with a quiet intensity. Petyr leaned forward slightly, as if drawn by curiosity. "If we're speaking of inconvenient truths," he said lightly, "we might begin with the dagger." Ned's gaze snapped to him. "What of it?" Petityr's smile widened. "A Valyrian steel dagger is not something one misplaces," he said, voice almost playful. "If someone used such a blade in an assassination attempt, it means they wished it to be known, or believed, that a certain kind of man was behind it." Catelyn's fingers tightened where they were clasped. She watched Petyr's face, the ease with which he spoke, the way his words danced around danger, as if he enjoyed the music. "And what kind of man would that be?" Ned asked, his patience thinning. Petyr's eyes gleamed. "A wealthy one," he said. "A powerful one. Perhaps even, but one with a taste for rare things." Pycelle's eyes shifted uneasily. Varys's mouth curved faintly. Catelyn saw it then, the first lie taking shape, smooth and bright, offered like a gift. Petyr turned his gaze to her, as if sharing something intimate. "Lady Stark," he said softly, "there are blades in this city with stories attached to them. Would you like to see this one?" Ned's voice was hard. "We have only a description." Petyr's smile did not falter. "Descriptions can be unreliable," he replied. "But I can show you the blade itself. And perhaps," his eyes glittered, "perhaps I can tell you who owned it." The room seemed to lean in. Catelyn felt Ned's distrust like heat at her back. She could almost hear his thoughts. "He is guiding us. He is leading us where he wants." And yet the dagger existed. The assassin had carried it. Someone had put it in his hand. That someone was close enough to power to own Valyrian steel, or close enough to steal it. "Show us," Catelyn said. Ned turned sharply. "Catelyn." She met his gaze steady. "We need every thread," her eyes said. "Even the ones that cut." Ned's jaw clenched, but he nodded once, stiffly. "Very well." Petyr's smile deepened, just a fraction too pleased. "Then let us not waste time," he said. Catelyn watched him rise with the grace of a man who had never walked a road in mud, and she understood something with a cold clarity. In this room, every man wore loyalty like a cloak, and cloaks could be changed. She looked at Ned's rigid posture, at the starkness of him among these silken men, and she felt the edges of their isolation closing in. Lysa's letter pressed like a secret heartbeat beneath Ned's tunic. The raven message from Winterfell burned in Catelyn's mind. An assassin had come for her son. The hand had died under strange circumstances. And here, in a room lined with dragons and gold, men spoke in half-truths and smiles. They were alone, not in numbers. There were guards, banners, titles, but in trust. Catelyn drew a slow breath and let it settle deep in her chest, like a stone dropped into water. If she was to survive this den of lions, she would need to learn which lions hunted for hunger, which hunted for sport, and which hunted because someone had paid them in gold. And she would need to remember, always, the one thing the North had taught her, that the South pretended to forget. Warmth could be a comfort, or it could be the breath of something waiting to bite. The king's table was a river of gold. Candles stood in ranks along its length, their flames steady in the warm air, throwing soft light across platters piled with roasted fowl and glazed pork, bowls of olives and figs, towers of bread shaped like little castles. Wine flowed in dark streams from crystal decanters, staining goblets red as garnets. Servants moved like silent shadows between chairs, refilling, clearing, bowing, always bowing. Catelyn sat among them as if she had been placed there by careful hands. The hall itself was meant to overwhelm. The ceiling rose high overhead, painted with dragons whose wings spanned the length of the beams, their mouths open as if they still breathed fire down on the heads of those who dined beneath. Along the walls, tapestries glimmered, gold thread woven through scenes of conquest, crowns, and the kneeling of lesser men. Everything was bright. Everything was loud, even when it was silent. The wrought hid beneath perfume and polish. Catelyn could smell it, faint under the spiced meats and the sweet wine, the human scent of too many bodies, the oily smoke of torches, and something older, the sour tang of damp stone that never quite dried, no matter how much gold you draped over it. Ned sat to the king's right, stiff in the hand seat, the chain of office heavy on his shoulders like a collar. Robert bellowed laughter at some crude jest from a fat knight across the table, slapping his own thigh hard enough to rattle his goblet. His cheeks were flushed with wine already, his beard flecked with crumbs. He looked like a man at a feast. Catelyn looked closer, and saw how his eyes slid away whenever a certain subject rose, how his laughter came a beat too late sometimes, how the warmth around him was like a fire set too high, bright, blazing, and hollow at the center. Queen Cersei sat to Robert's left, her posture perfect, her hands delicate around her goblet, as if she drank only enough to wet her lips. Her gown shimmered green in candlelight, and emeralds circled her throat like frozen tears. She smiled when Robert laughed, but the smile never reached her eyes. Those eyes were on Catelyn. Not constantly. Cersei was too skilled to stare, but often enough that Catelyn felt them like the prickle of a blade against her skin. Sansa sat farther down the table among the other young ladies and squires, bright as a coin newly minted. She laughed politely at a handsome knight's joke, her cheeks flushed, her eyes shining with the thrill of being seen. Arya sat beside her like a stone thrown into silk, back straight, mouth tight, gaze darting everywhere, missing nothing. A serving girl bent to offer her more bread, and Arya refused with a shake of her head sharp enough to cut. Joffrey sat near Sansa, pale gold curls falling into his eyes. He spoke in a low voice, lips curled in a smile that never softened his gaze. Sansa leaned closer, as if drawn by the sweetness of his words. Catelyn watched the angle of their heads, the way Sansa's shoulders tilted toward him. A chain, she thought. It was not iron, but it would hold just as well. Across the table, Patyr Baelish lounged like he belonged there by right. He wore dark velvet, a mockingbird pin at his collar, and his smile flashed whenever a noble woman's eyes flicked his way. When he caught Catelyn watching him, he lifted his goblet in a small salute, as if they shared a private joke. She did not return it. At the far end, Varys glided between groups like a whisper given flesh, laughing softly, murmuring compliments, gathering words the way other men gathered coin. Grand Maester Pycelle sat heavily in his chair, beard spread across his chest like a white waterfall, blinking through the feast as if the noise might lull him into sleep. Sir Barristan stood behind the king, white cloak pristine, eyes like flint, and Cersei watched. The first course passed in a haze of voices and clinking cups. Robert ate like a man who feared his food might vanish. Ned took only enough to be polite, his attention split between the king's booming laughter and the quiet calculations behind it. Catelyn ate little. She watched mouths moving around the table, words sliding in and out like eels. When the servants brought the second course, spiced fish in lemon sauce, bowls of buttery peas, Cersei finally turned to her fully. "Lady Stark," she said, voice warm as honey, "I have been meaning to speak with you." Catelyn set her fork down carefully. "Your grace honors me." Cersei's smile deepened. "We are both mothers," she said, as if that alone made them allies. "It seems natural that we should understand one another." Catelyn held her gaze. "I understand much," she replied evenly. Cersei gave a small musical laugh. "Of course you do. Your daughters are delightful." Her eyes drifted to Sansa, who was listening raptly as Joffrey spoke. "Your eldest is quite the beauty, so northern yet soft enough to suit the south." A compliment wrapped around a hook. Catelyn's mouth curved into a polite smile. "Sansa has always had a gentle heart," she said. "She takes after her father in that." Cersei's eyes glittered. Does she? Her gaze slid briefly to Ned, seated stiffly beside Robert. That gentleness will serve her well as queen. She will need it. Catelyn's smile did not waver. She will need strength as well, she replied. Cersei lifted her goblet and took a delicate sip, as if savoring the taste of the words. Strength, she echoed. How very northern. In the south we prefer grace. Catelyn's fingers rested lightly on the tablecloth, feeling its fine weave. Grace is a kind of strength, she said. It takes discipline to smile when one wishes to bare one's teeth. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to sharpen around them. Cersei's smile froze, then softened again, as effortless as breathing. Well said, the queen murmured. You are not what I expected. Catelyn inclined her head. And you are exactly what I expected, your grace. The words were courteous. The edge beneath them was not. Cersei's eyes narrowed a fraction. Then she laughed lightly as if delighted. Tell me, she said, leaning slightly closer. Is it true what they say of the North? That your women ride with bows and hunt alongside their men? Catelyn's gaze flicked to Arya. Her youngest daughter sat rigid, eyes fixed on a plate as if the food offended her. Arya's hands were not still. One finger tapped once against the table's underside, a small, restless rhythm. Catelyn knew that rhythm. It was a wolf pacing in its cage. Some do, Catelyn said. The North is large. It requires many kinds of courage. Cersei's gaze followed hers to Arya and lingered. And your younger girl, she said softly. Arya. She is... Arya's head snapped up at the sound of her name, eyes narrowing. For a moment she looked straight at the queen with open suspicion. Catelyn felt her spine tighten. She is young, she replied, voice smooth. And she is a Stark. Cersei's smile thinned. Spirited girls become spirited women, she murmured. And spirited women often find themselves unhappy, especially at court. Catelyn saw the meaning beneath it. This place will break her, or I will. She will learn what she must, Catelyn said calmly, as all children do. Cersei tilted her head. And what must she learn, I wonder? To curtsy prettily? To smile sweetly? To hold her tongue? Her eyes gleamed. Or to obey? Catelyn met her gaze, letting her own calm harden like ice. She must learn to survive, she said softly. In any place. Cersei's fingers tightened briefly around her goblet. Survival, she repeated. Yes, a useful lesson. Robert's laughter boomed then, cutting through the tension like a cudgel. He was telling a hunting story, embellishing it with wild gestures, and the men around him roared in response. The noise gave Cersei a moment to smooth her expression back into warmth. You are far from home, Cersei said, her voice almost kind. It must be difficult. You left your injured son behind, I hear. Catelyn's breath caught, but she did not let it show. She felt Bran's name like a bruise beneath her ribs. She felt the raven's message, the assassin, the dagger. The North teaches us to do difficult things, she said. It is how we endure winter. Cersei smiled. And here, she replied, we endure other seasons. The words were soft, but the threat beneath them was clear as a blade in sunlight. Catelyn let her smile remain. She did not rise to the bait. She did not let grief show. She did not give the queen a public excuse to sharpen her claws. Then perhaps, Catelyn said gently, we might help one another endure. Cersei studied her for a long moment, eyes like green glass. Then she leaned back, her posture relaxing, as if the duel had ended in a draw. Perhaps, she agreed, and her smile returned, bright and false. We shall see. The conversation drifted then, as if nothing sharp had passed between them. Cersei turned to speak to another lady, laughing softly. Robert drank. Ned remained stiff. The feast continued. But something had changed. Catelyn had felt the queen's probing hands in her words, felt the attempt to find weakness, to pry open cracks. Cersei had wanted her to flinch, to show softness, to show that she could be made to bleed. Catelyn had not given her that satisfaction. Not tonight. Yet the price of the détente was clear. Cersei now knew she was not dealing with a docile northern wife. She was dealing with a woman who watched and remembered and chose her words like weapons. A player. Catelyn's gaze slid to her daughters again, and the warmth of the hall suddenly felt suffocating. Sansa's smile was too wide. Arya's shoulders were too tense. Joffrey leaned toward Sansa, whispering, and Sansa's eyes shone. They were not guests here. They were pieces. When the feast finally ended and nobles rose in a flurry of silks and laughter, Catelyn moved swiftly. She did not linger for idle talk. She gathered Sansa and Arya with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Sansa protested softly at first, reluctant to leave the glow of attention. "Mother?" "Joffrey." "Later," Catelyn said, and did not soften the word. Arya followed without complaint, but her eyes were sharp, tracking every guard they passed, every servant who dipped a head and watched from the corner of an eye. Back in their chambers, the air was cooler. The scents of lemon and polish gave way to linen and candle smoke. Catelyn closed the door and turned the key herself. She looked at her daughters. Sansa's cheeks were still flushed with excitement. She clutched the edge of her gown as if it were a treasure. "The Queen spoke to me," she said breathlessly. She said, "The Queen speaks to everyone," Catelyn replied, her voice gentler than the words. She stepped close and smoothed a stray lock of hair beneath Sansa's hood. "Listen to me. In this castle, every smile has teeth. Every compliment has a hook." Sansa's smile faltered. "Mother, you're always so suspicious." Catelyn's hand paused. She studied her daughter's face, soft, hopeful, unaware of the knives hidden beneath lace. For a moment, Catelyn saw herself at 15, in Riverrun's sun, thinking the world was shaped by honor and songs. Then she remembered Bran's blood, the assassin's blade, Lysa's frantic letter. She lowered her hand. "And in the north," she said quietly, "winter comes whether you believe in it or not." Arya leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Catelyn's gaze flicked to her. Arya's eyes were steady, too old for her face. "The Queen fears what she cannot control," Catelyn replied. "That is not the same as hate." Arya's mouth twisted. "Feels like it." Catelyn exhaled slowly. "From now on," she said, "you do not go anywhere alone. Not the Godswood, not the yard, not the sept, not the kitchens. If you wish to walk, you take Stark men with you." Sansa's eyes widened. "But the Queen, she has guards. The Queen's guards are the Queen's." Catelyn interrupted gently. "Not yours." Sansa opened her mouth, then closed it, uncertain. Arya pushed off the wall. "Good," she said, almost fierce. "I don't want their guards." Catelyn looked between them and felt the weight of the city settle heavier. She had wanted to bring them south to keep them close. Now she realized what close truly meant here, close to the lion's jaws. The next morning she acted. She rose early, before the keep fully woke, and sent for Jory Cassel. When he arrived, he looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but his posture straight. "My lady," he said, bowing. "I want Stark men posted at my daughter's doors," Catelyn said without preamble. "Not Lannister men, not Baratheon. Stark." Jory hesitated, only a heartbeat. "The king's household will not object if the hand requests it," Catelyn said, and kept her tone calm as still water. "And if they do object, I will know exactly what they fear." Jory's jaw tightened. "Aye, my lady. And I want a man with them when they walk the castle," she continued. "At all times, too, if possible. Quietly. No fuss." Jory nodded. "It will be done." As he turned to leave, she added, "And I want to know which men already stand watch over them. Names, faces, who answers to whom." Jory's eyes met hers. "You think they're being watched?" Catelyn did not answer. She did not need to. The question itself was the answer. After Jory left, she sent for Ned. He came with the weight of counsel still on him, the chain of office hanging heavy. His face was tight, his eyes weary in a way she had not seen in Winterfell. He looked like a man standing in water too deep, trying to keep his footing. "I spoke with the Queen last night," Catelyn said. Ned's expression hardened. "What did she say?" "She asked about Sansa's betrothal," Catelyn replied. "And Arya." Ned's jaw tightened. "And you?" "I smiled," Catelyn said. "I did not give her what she wanted." Ned's gaze searched her face. "What did she want?" Catelyn's voice dropped. "To see weakness. To see that she could push and make me bleed." Ned's eyes went colder. "Then she will try again." "Yes," Catelyn agreed. "And next time she may not use words." Ned's hand closed briefly into a fist. "I will speak to Robert." Catelyn's gaze held his. Robert laughs at danger until it bites him, she said softly. We cannot rely on his protection. Not here. Ned's mouth tightened, but he did not argue. He knew. He simply hated it. That afternoon, Petyr Baelish requested a private word. He met Catelyn in a smaller solar off, one of the keep's quieter corridors, a room lined with books and a narrow window that looked out over the city's rooftops. The air smelled of parchment and dust and faint citrus. Petyr leaned against the table as if it were his own home, smile ready. My lady, he said, I trust the capital is treating you well. Catelyn did not sit. She remained standing, hands folded, posture composed. The capital treats everyone according to what they are worth, she said. Petyr's smile widened. Spoken like a woman who has learned quickly. His eyes flicked over her face, lingering a moment too long. I wanted to offer you something. Catelyn's stomach tightened. What sort of something? Petyr spread his hands. Information, he said lightly. Or perhaps influence. The two are often the same thing here. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. The City Watch, he murmured. The gold cloaks. They answer to Janos Slint, officially. But Janos is practical, and practical men answer to coin. Catelyn watched him carefully. And you hold the coin, she said. Petyr gave a small bow. Master of coin, he agreed. Among other things. Catelyn kept her face still. Why offer this to me? Petyr's smile softened into something that might have been sincerity if she did not know him. Because you are alone here, he said. Because your husband is an honorable man in a dishonorable city, and because I would see you safe. The words were almost gentle. Catelyn did not believe them, yet the offer was real. Access to the gold cloaks meant gates, streets, movement. It meant eyes in the city. It meant, if the worst came, men who could open a door rather than close it. A valuable piece placed on the board, and Petyr wanted her to take it. She stepped closer until they were nearly within arm's reach. Petyr's eyes brightened, pleased at her approach. He thought she was drawn in. Catelyn smiled, small, courteous. You are very generous, she said. Petyr's gaze flicked to her lips. I have always been, he murmured. Catelyn's smile did not change. Then let us be honest, she said softly. Nothing in this city is free. Petyr laughed, delighted. No, he agreed. Nothing is. Catelyn held his gaze, letting the silence stretch, until Petyr's smile tightened slightly at the edges. You offer me influence over the gold cloaks, she said. In return, you want? Petyr lifted a hand to his chest as if wounded. My lady, you wound me. Must everything be a bargain? In King's Landing, Catelyn replied. Yes. Petyr's eyes gleamed. Very well, he said, voice dropping. In return, I want you to remember who offered you a hand when no one else would. A simple request. A dangerous one. Loyalty as a debt. Catelyn nodded slowly, as if considering. And if I accept, she said, how do I know the gold cloaks will answer when I call? Petyr's smile returned, smooth as silk. Because, he said softly, I will give you a name. He leaned closer. Tumard, he whispered. A captain in the watch. He owes me. If you need something done quietly, an escort, a gate opened, a man followed, you send word to Tumard. He will act. Catelyn filed the name away like a knife tucked into a sleeve. Petyr leaned back, satisfied. There, he said. A small gift. Proof of my loyalty. Catelyn nodded, polite. Thank you, she said, and made the words sound like acceptance. Petyr's smile warmed. He thought he had placed himself between her and danger. Catelyn thought she had placed a leash around his neck. As she left the solar, the corridor beyond smelled faintly of wax and perfume. Servants passed with lowered eyes. Guards stood motionless, hands on spear shafts. Catelyn walked back toward her daughter's chambers and felt the keep closing around her like a fist. The game had begun in earnest. And the first rule was already clear. In King's Landing, even alliances were cages, some gilded, some not. She touched the small key at her belt, the one that fit her daughter's doors, and kept walking. Morning in King's Landing came on like a slow fever. The light that spilled through the Hans Tower windows was bright, but it carried no crispness with it, no clean bite. It was a pale wash that softened edges, made stone look almost gentle. The air was already warm, already thick with the city's layered smells, salt from the Blackwater, smoke from 1,000 cooking fires, the sour tang of refuse that never fully left the streets below. Catelyn stood at the window and watched the city wake. From up here, rooftops shifted as shutters opened. Narrow lanes filled with movement, carts creaking, vendors shouting, a stream of bodies flowing toward markets and docks. The city moved like an animal, hungry, restless, always searching for something to consume. Behind her, Ned's boots crossed the chamber floor, measured and quiet. He had dressed in dark wool again, as if stubborn cloth could shield him from southern silk. He looked out at the city only once before turning away, as if he refused to let it claim too much of his attention. "I'm going out," he said. Catelyn did not turn from the window. "To where?" Ned buckled his sword belt with a tug that made the leather creak. "Jon Arryn went somewhere before he died," he replied. "I intend to find out where." The words might have sounded simple, but the way he spoke them carried something harder. Determination, yes, yet also a kind of grim refusal, as if the city could be solved like a puzzle if he pressed on it long enough. Catelyn finally turned. "Take men." Ned's gaze met hers, steady. "I will, and do not go alone into alleys because someone tells you it's the shortest way," she added, sharper than she meant. A faint flicker crossed his face. Annoyance, perhaps, or tired amusement. "You think I'm a boy fresh off the farms?" "I think the city makes fools of men who believe they cannot be fooled," Catelyn said. Ned's mouth tightened. He did not argue. He only nodded once and reached for his cloak. Catelyn watched him for a heartbeat longer, then said, "I will be busy as well." Ned paused at the door. "With what?" "With people who matter," she answered, and let the meaning sit between them. Ned studied her, suspicion and worry braided together. "Catelyn, I will not sit in these rooms and wait for ravens," she said, and felt Bran's blood rise in her memory like heat. "Not again." For a moment, Ned's gaze softened. He stepped closer and took her hands, his palms rough and warm. "Be careful," he said quietly. Catelyn's fingers tightened around his. "Always," she replied. Then he was gone, cloak sweeping the doorway, leaving behind the faint scent of leather and cold steel. Catelyn exhaled slowly and let the warmth of the room settle back around her. She had come south because she refused to let him walk into this trap alone. Now she would not let him pretend it was only a hunt for truth. The street of steel smelled like hot iron and sweat. Ned rode down through the city with Jory Cassell and a handful of guards in stark gray. The streets narrowed as they descended from the keep, stone giving way to packed dirt and cobbles slick with filth. People pressed close to the horses, vendors holding up skewers of meat, boys darting between legs like rats, women with baskets of bread balanced on their hips. Some stared at the Stark men with open curiosity. Some looked away too quickly. The forge sounds reached him before the street did. Hammer on anvil, the hiss of quenched metal, the roar of fire fed too greedily. The air grew hotter with every step, carrying the sharp bite of smoke and heated oil. Ned felt sweat gather beneath his collar and hated it. They stopped outside a shop whose sign was a blacksmith's hammer, painted in bright strokes. The door stood open, heat spilling out like breath. Inside, the world glowed orange. A man stood at the heart of it, bare arms slick with sweat, muscles corded from years of lifting and striking. Tobho Moat. Ned recognized him from Robert's stories, the armorer who made beauty out of steel. The man looked up as Ned entered, eyes narrowing briefly before his face shifted into practiced respect. "My lord hand," Tobho said, wiping his hands on a cloth already stained dark. "To what do I owe?" "I am looking for someone," Ned cut in. Tobho's eyes flicked to the guards behind him. "We make armor here, my lord, not trouble." "I am looking for Jon Arryn," Ned said, and watched Tobho closely. "Or for where he went. He came here." A pause. Tobho's gaze slid away just for a heartbeat toward the back of the forge. The smallest tell, but Ned had spent too many years reading men to miss it. "He came," Tobho admitted, voice cautious. "A few times. Asking questions." "What questions?" Tobho hesitated, then jerked his chin. "Ask the boy." Ned followed the glance. A young man stood near the back, half hidden by a rack of spearheads. He held a hammer loosely in his hand, and his hair was dark, black as coal. His shoulders were broad, his stance solid, as if the forge had shaped him the way it shaped steel. He looked up when Ned approached, and for a moment the noise of the forge seemed to fall away. Those eyes, blue, clear, familiar in a way that made Ned's skin tighten. The boy's face had Robert in it, not the bloated king who sat laughing over wine, but the Robert of stories, the Robert who had been a storm on two legs, the Robert who had laughed like thunder and broken men with his hammer. The resemblance hit like a fist. "What is your name?" Ned asked. The boy's gaze sharpened with suspicion. "Gendry," he said. His voice was blunt, unpolished. "Why?" Ned's throat felt dry in the heat. "How long have you worked here?" "As long as I can remember," Gendry replied. "Since Tobo took me in." Tobo's mouth tightened slightly, as if he disliked the direction of the questions. Ned kept his eyes on Gendry. "Do you know who your father was?" Gendry's jaw clenched. "No," he said, "and I don't care." It sounded like a lie he'd told himself until it became a shield. Ned's gaze traced the boy's face. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the dark hair damp with sweat. He could almost see Jon Arryn standing here, years ago, staring at the same features with dawning realization. He could almost see Arryn's fingers tightening around a book, his mind racing through lines of lineage. Ned swallowed. "Did Jon Arryn speak to you?" Gendry shrugged, restless. "An old lord came. He asked me questions. He looked at me like," he faltered, frowning, searching for the words, "like I was something he'd lost." Ned's chest tightened. "Did he tell you his name?" "No," Gendry said, "but he came again. And once—" Ned felt the forge's heat press in. "Robert came here." Gendry nodded once, sharp. "He stood right where you're standing. He didn't say much. He just—" The boy's mouth twisted, and for a second he looked younger, hurt flashing across his face. He looked at me. Then he left. Tobo cleared his throat. "The boy's got no name to claim," he said roughly. "He's got work. That's enough." Ned turned slightly, his gaze hard on Tobo. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. Tobo's eyes narrowed. "I know what I'm paid to know," he said. "And I know when to keep my mouth shut." Gold, Ned thought. Always gold. He looked back at Gendry, and something settled into place inside him with cold certainty. Jon Arryn had been digging in the places men with clean hands did not visit. He had been following a trail that led not to a murder weapon, but to a secret living and breathing in the city's grime. Ned stepped back, letting the forge's noise rush back into his ears. "Keep him safe," he said to Tobo, voice low. Tobo's brow furrowed. Safe from what? Ned did not answer. He glanced at Jory, and Jory's eyes met his, understanding that they had stepped onto ground that could swallow them. As they left the forge, the street of steel felt narrower, the faces watching them sharper. Ned mounted his horse, cloak sticking to sweat-damp skin, and stared ahead through the crowded street. Robert's bastards, he thought. How many? Catelyn chose a different battlefield. The Red Keep had gardens, green pockets carved out of stone and blood-colored walls, places meant to make courtiers forget the city's stink for an hour. When Catelyn walked there, the air smelled of roses and crushed herbs, damp earth and sweet blooms. Birds sang in cages hung from tree branches like ornaments. Even the birds sounded trapped. Renly Baratheon met her beneath a flowering arbor, dressed as if every day were a feast. His tunic was green velvet trimmed in gold, his cloak clasped at his throat with a small stag. His hair was black, thick, shining in the sun. He smiled the moment he saw her, an easy, charming curve that made men trust him before he spoke. "Lady Stark," he greeted, bowing with grace. "The capital is brighter with you in it." Catelyn returned the bow with northern composure. "My Lord Renly?" He gestured to the path. "Walk with me," he said, as if it were an invitation to gossip rather than a maneuver. Catelyn did not refuse. She fell into step beside him, letting the garden's soft sounds fill the silence between them. As they walked, she watched him the way she watched Cersei, reading posture, tone, the way his eyes flicked toward passing guards. Renly spoke lightly of court pleasures. The next tourney, a singer's new song, a ridiculous argument between two lords over a hunting hawk. He made it all sound like a game. Catelyn let him speak until he grew comfortable. Then she said, "Jon Arryn was your brother's father in all but blood." Renly's smile faltered for half a heartbeat. "He was," he admitted, voice lighter than it should have been. "He taught Robert to pretend at responsibility. And he died," Catelyn continued. Suddenly. Renly's gaze slid to her, sharper now. "Many men die suddenly." Not many hands, Catelyn replied. They walked past a statue of a dragon with wings spread wide. A fountain trickled beneath it, water running over stone scales. Renly sighed. You northerners don't do subtle, he said. Catelyn's mouth curved faintly. Subtlety is a southern luxury. Renly's eyes glittered with amusement. And you've come to drown in it? I've come to keep my husband alive, Catelyn said simply. That stripped away the last of Renly's playfulness. He looked at her fully now, and she saw the intelligence beneath his charm, quick and calculating. Ned Stark is an honorable man, Renly said carefully. Honor is admirable. It is also dangerous here, Catelyn replied. Renly's smile returned, but it was thinner. So what do you want from me, Lady Stark? Catelyn let her gaze drift over the garden, taking in the guards at a distance, the servants tending flower beds, the lady-in-waiting lingering too close. She kept her voice low. I want to know who has swords, she said, and who those swords truly serve. Renly's eyebrows lifted. Bold. Catelyn looked at him. Truth is bold, and it gets people killed. Renly studied her for a moment, then laughed softly, not unkindly. You sound like you've already learned our rules. I'm learning, she said, fast. Renly's gaze sharpened. I have men, he admitted, and there was pride in it. Not enough to fight a war in the streets, but enough to make someone hesitate. Enough to protect, if the king wished it. The king laughs at danger, Catelyn said, thinking of Robert at the feast, red-faced with wine. So I ask you. Renly's eyes narrowed. Careful, he murmured. People have died for less than what you're implying. I know, Catelyn said. They stopped beneath the arbor again, the roses above them heavy with bloom. Renly leaned closer, his voice dropping. If you're looking for allies, he said, you'd do better to look beyond this keep. Catelyn heard the unspoken name in the space between them. Highgarden, the Tyrells. Their wealth, their reach, their armies. She kept her face still. I am looking for those who can keep my children safe, she said. Renly's gaze flicked briefly toward where the younger nobles gathered in the gardens. Laughter, silk, sunlight. Then you are looking for power, he said. Yes, Catelyn replied, and felt no shame in it. Because power is what this city respects. Renly's smile returned, slow and knowing. We understand one another, he said. I will not promise you more than I can give. But, he paused, letting the word hang. If you need someone to listen, someone to see the ugliness beneath the gold, you may speak to me. It was not an alliance, not yet, but it was a door left cracked open. Catelyn inclined her head. I will remember that, my lord. Renly bowed again, as if they had simply exchanged pleasantries about roses. Then he walked away, cloak trailing behind him like a banner. Catelyn watched him go and felt the garden's sweetness turn faintly sour in her mouth. A man with men, she thought. A man with ambition he hid under charm. Useful, dangerous, just like the rest. Later, she went to the great sept. The sept of Baelor rose like a pale mountain above the city, its domes gleaming in the sun. Steps stretched wide before it, and the air around it felt different. Less smoke, more incense. Small folk climbed the steps with heads bowed, hands clasped, murmuring prayers under their breath. Beggars sat along the sides with outstretched palms, their eyes hopeful and hollow. Catelyn ascended slowly, her cloak drawn around her, her hair pinned neatly. She did not bring a parade of guards, only 2 Stark men at a respectful distance. Too many swords would look like a threat here. Inside, the air was cool and thick with incense. Light filtered down in shafts through high windows, turning dust into drifting gold. Candles burned by the hundreds, their flames tiny and steady. The smell of melted wax and perfumed smoke wrapped around her like a shroud. The High Septon sat on a dais, fat hands resting on his knees. His robes were richly embroidered, more jeweled than pious. His face shone with oil. Around him, Septons moved quietly, their sandals whispering on marble. When Catelyn approached, the High Septon's eyes lifted with lazy interest. A Stark in the sept was a curiosity. Lady Stark, he said, voice soft and indulgent. The North honors the Seven with its presence. Catelyn bowed her head. The gods are everywhere, she replied, and her words were respectful without being submissive. Even in the snow. The High Septon smiled faintly, as if amused by the thought of prayer in cold places. And what brings you to our holy halls? Catelyn let her gaze drift upward to the statue of the mother, carved in pale stone, her hands outstretched. She thought of Bran. She thought of Sansa's bright face at the feast, Arya's tense shoulders. She thought of the city's teeth. Grief, Catelyn said softly, and duty. The High Septon's eyes softened, not from compassion, but from interest. Grief was a currency here too. I heard of your son, he murmured, a tragedy. Catelyn lowered her gaze, letting just enough sorrow show to make the words believable. A mother prays where she can, she said, and a mother prepares where she must. The High Septon leaned forward slightly. Prepares? Catelyn lifted her head. The realm is uneasy, she said. The hand is dead. Rumors move faster than truth. The people will need guidance. The High Septon's eyes gleamed. He liked the sound of importance. And the faith gives that guidance, he said. Catelyn inclined her head. The faith gives legitimacy, she replied, and let the word land like a coin on a table. When men in silk quarrel, it is the gods the people listen to. The High Septon smiled, satisfied. A wise woman, he murmured. Not like most northern ladies, I hear. Catelyn's mouth curved politely. Wisdom keeps a house standing through winter, she said. The High Septon chuckled, his belly shaking beneath embroidered cloth. Indeed, indeed, he lifted a jeweled hand. Light a candle, Lady Stark, pray. The seven hear all? Catelyn did, kneeling before the mother's statue, lighting a candle with hands that did not tremble. The flame caught and steadied. She bowed her head, letting the incense fill her lungs. She did not pray for victory. She prayed for endurance, and as she rose, she knew she had done what she came to do. She had been seen. A northern lady, the Hand's wife, in the great sept, pious, respectful, public. If the court tried to paint her as savage, she would have marble and candles to contradict them. If her husband fell, she would have already laid one stone of support beneath her feet. Outside, on the sept steps, the city's noise rushed back like a wave. Beggars called, vendors shouted. The heat wrapped around her again. Catelyn descended with her cloak pulled close, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. In this city, even prayer was politics. Ned returned that evening with soot on his boots and a hard light in his eyes. He carried a book under one arm, a heavy tome bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and thick. He set it down on the table with a dull thud that made the candle flames jump. Catelyn looked at it, unimpressed. A book? Ned's jaw tightened. Jon Arryn borrowed it, he said. He read it, he marked pages. Catelyn poured him wine without asking, the dark liquid catching candlelight. And you think the answer to murder lies in ink? Ned's eyes flicked to her, sharp. It lies in truth. Truth, Catelyn thought, and remembered Cersei's smile. Ned opened the book with a careful hand. The pages smelled of dust and old leather. He flipped through until he found a section marked with a strip of ribbon. Names filled the page. Marriages, births, lines of descent. He traced them with his finger. The Baratheons, he said. Catelyn leaned closer despite herself. The names meant little to her, but Ned's intensity made them feel suddenly important. He turned the page, showing her a line of ink that had been underlined. Black of hair, she read. The phrase repeated again and again in her mind as Ned spoke. Every Baratheon, Ned said quietly, for 300 years. Black hair, blue eyes. It is written like a refrain. He turned another page, then another, faster now, as if chasing something that ran just ahead of him. And Robert's bastards, he continued, and his voice tightened around the word. I saw one today. Catelyn's hand paused with the wine jug. A bastard? Ned's gaze met hers. A boy, he said. A smith's apprentice. Black hair, strong jaw, blue eyes. Catelyn felt a flicker of understanding, though the shape of it was still unclear. Robert has many, she said cautiously. It was an ugly truth known even in Winterfell. The king's appetites were not subtle. Ned nodded once, and they all look like him. He did not say the rest, but Catelyn heard it anyway. If Robert's seed always bred true. She glanced toward the door, toward where the keep's corridors led to her daughter's chambers. Toward Sansa, promised to Joffrey. Toward the queen's children. Catelyn's stomach tightened. Ned's voice lowered. Jon Arryn was asking questions about this, he said. He was looking at the king's bastards. He was reading this book. And then he died. Catelyn said, the words cold. Ned's eyes burned. Yes. Catelyn stared at the book, suddenly seeing it not as dusty ink, but as a knife laid out on a table. What you are holding, she said slowly, is not just truth. Ned's jaw clenched. It is. It is a death sentence, Catelyn corrected. For someone. Perhaps for all of us. Ned's eyes narrowed. If the Queen's children— Do not say it aloud, Catelyn snapped. Then softened her tone when she saw the flash in his face. Not even here. Ned's mouth tightened. We are in the Hand's Tower. And the hand before you died, Catelyn said. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Ned's fingers curled around the edge of the open page. If I am right, he said, and his voice was quiet now, controlled. Then, the king is being deceived. The realm is being deceived. And if you speak it without swords behind you, Catelyn replied, you will be killed before you finish the sentence. Ned looked at her, anger and stubbornness rising. So we do nothing? Catelyn stepped closer, her voice dropping, sharp with urgency. We do not do nothing, she said. We do the thing that keeps us alive. We do the thing that keeps our children alive. Ned's eyes flashed. I will not bargain with lies. Catelyn felt heat rise in her chest. Frustration, fear, the old crack between them widening. This city bargains with everything, she said. Your honor is not a shield here, Ned. It is a target. Ned's jaw worked. Jon Arryn died because he found the truth, he said. If I turn away, you will die because you found the truth and did not know what to do with it. Catelyn snapped, and the harshness of her own words startled her. She drew a breath and forced her voice lower, steadier. Listen to me. Truth gets you killed. Power keeps you alive. That's not who we are, he said. She thought of Bran's blood on Winterfell's stones. She thought of Sansa's bright eyes fixed on a prince who might be built of lies. She thought of Arya glaring at a queen who would not hesitate to crush her. This is not about who we are, she said softly. It is about what this city will do to us if we pretend it plays by our rules. Ned looked away, and in that simple motion, Catelyn saw how alone he felt. How far he was from Winterfell's gray walls and plain truths. How much he wanted to believe that rightness was enough. Catelyn reached for his hand. Rough fingers meeting hers. You want justice, she said. I want survival. Those are not enemies, Ned. But here, survival must come first, or there will be no one left to receive justice. Ned's grip tightened around her hand, hard enough to hurt. I hate this place, he whispered. Catelyn did not answer. She only held on. Outside the window, King's Landing glowed in the evening heat, lanterns flickering like fireflies across the sprawl. Somewhere below, music rose, pipes and drums, laughter spilling into the streets. The city celebrated while daggers moved in shadows. Far to the north, winter held Winterfell in its quiet fist. Robb sat in the high seat beneath the direwolf banner, and the wood felt too cold beneath his hands. The great hall was full of voices. Bannermen come to speak of stores, hunters asking permission to range farther, stewards reporting on grain and salt and the need for more wool before deeper cold set in. Robb listened, chin lifted, trying to make his voice carry the same weight as his father's. Grey wind lay at his feet, eyes pale, ears flicking at every sound. The wolf's presence made men careful with their words. Theon Greyjoy lounged near the hearth, smirking at some jest, but even he watched Robb with a different sort of attention now, measuring the boy who was becoming a lord. Maester Luwin stood near the dais, chain glinting, murmuring counsel when needed. Ser Roderick's posture remained stiff as stone, his hand never far from his sword. Winterfell ran because hands moved to keep it running. And yet, between the reports and the duties, there were gaps that no one could fill. Robb's gaze went sometimes, unbidden, to the tower window where Bran lay. Sometimes he stared at it too long, and his mouth tightened as if he were holding something back. Sometimes he looked at the doors, as if expecting Catelyn to sweep in with quiet authority, or Ned to stride to the dais and make everything feel solid again. They did not come. At night, when the hall emptied and the fires burned low, the castle felt larger. Too many rooms, too many corridors, too much stone holding too much silence. The wolves grew restless. The wind prowled the battlements. Ravens came and went with news that was never enough. The north was quiet, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the first crack of thunder from the south. And far away, In a tower of warm stone above a city that stank of smoke and secrets, Catelyn Stark stared at a dusty book on a table and felt the world tightening around her family like a noose. And so, the trap is set. Ned Stark holds the truth that could destroy the kingdom, but Catelyn Stark knows that truth alone is not enough to save them. As King Robert rides into the Kingswood for his final hunt, the wolves are surrounded. What happens next? Does Catelyn's alliance with Littlefinger save Ned? Does she get the girls out before the slaughter begins? Or will the lion swallow the wolf whole? Subscribe and hit the bell right now for part 2. You do not want to miss the War of the Five Kings rewritten.